Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel, and thanks for tuning in. My name is Sarah Peternell. I'm the owner of Family Nutrition Services in Denver, Colorado. Today I'm answering the question, what types of foods may negatively affect my child's brain health and development? It's a great question. And if you're like me with school-aged children, we certainly are thinking very carefully during the school year about what types of foods to consume, to offer for consumption for our children, as well as what types of foods may negatively impact them and the types of foods that perhaps our children should avoid in order for them to have the most sufficient and adequate resources for their brain's fuel and energy to support them through school and learning. So I'm going to share some of the information that is actually also available on my website in my blog under family nutrition resources and articles. So you can check that out there. I have an entire article that gives you a lot more in-depth information all about nutrition for growing brains. So the very first thing that I want to address for you today is really that brain issues for kids are kind of on the rise. We know that through various studies, poor nutrition has been linked to child mood and behavioral problems. Especially we see this with depression, anxiety, even aggressiveness and sometimes violence in children. But the most common thing that we hear, especially among school-age children, is about ADHD, which stands for Attention Deficit and or Hyperactivity Disorder. And this is a common brain really set of symptoms or syndrome. It's a disorder marked by ongoing patterns of inattention and or hyperactivity that interferes with functioning and or development. So it's in many ways, it's a catch-all description for a lot of the symptoms or syndromes that may be going on in a child whose brain is not functioning as well as it could be. Due to maybe a variety of inputs and stimulus, but also a variety of deficiencies in what the body needs from a nutritional standpoint. So the first statistic that's a little bit unnerving is that the CDC, or the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, reports that a few years ago in 2016, about 11% of children during their school-aged years, so roughly say 4 to 17 or 18 years old, had a diagnosis of ADHD, and that is the equivalent, of about 6 million children in the United States. So this is actually a really huge population of people. And in my practice, which is Family Nutrition Services, I work with a large number of families who have children who are school-aged, and this is typically one of their concerns, that perhaps they've received a diagnosis of ADHD, or that they feel that their child has some ADHD-like symptoms that doesn't quite fit a diagnostic profile, but that they believe is related to diet, lifestyle, and some other kind of nutritional health components, and they really want to work on those to get to the root cause of why maybe their child is suffering and struggling in school and maybe with some other behavioral problems. So essentially, in conventional medicine, there really isn't a cure for ADHD, although there are a lot of different types of medications and other conventional treatments to both help reduce symptoms but also to improve functioning. And, I do have to say that sadly, I feel that there are a lot of medical practitioners who aren't necessarily looking at the child's diet to assess if there are potentially any, again, foods that are complicating the picture, foods that may be causing inflammation, maybe foods that are overexciting the brain or stimulating the brain in a negative way, and also they may not be looking to see if there are deficiencies which are not allowing the brain to grow and develop and function as it should under normal circumstances. So I want to talk about a few specific foods that may be contributing to ADHD-like symptoms. And again, I get a lot of these questions from families that I work with, and these are going to sound probably pretty familiar or common to you if you've been asking some of these same questions, maybe about any members of your family or any of your children's behaviors, because I think instinctively as parents, we often know that maybe something that's in our child's food plan may actually be playing a negative role. So the first is about sugar. And again, this is very common. I want to break it down for you as basically as I can. The first is that in studies, and you can research this on the internet, it's overwhelming and somewhat frustrating to see the number of studies that do look at the relationship between refined sugars and ADHD. And the conclusions that many of these researchers have come up with is that sugar doesn't necessarily play a role in ADHD. But I would disagree. And so do the parents that I work with, who certainly know that their children, when they consume refined sugar, do actually maybe suffer from some setbacks. My own research with my own kids is that, the human brain uses tons of energy, right? Uses more energy than actually any other organ in the body. And glucose has to be that primary source of fuel in order for the brain to work properly. So excessive sugar will certainly impair cognitive skills and self-control, not just in kids, but in people of all ages. So think about yourself for a moment. If you're an adult, you're sitting here, you're watching this YouTube channel and this YouTube video, and you might be thinking to yourself, yeah, sometimes when I eat sugar, I get a little bit, cuckoo as well. Initially, you might feel amazing. You might feel great. You might feel that sort of endorphin rush, that promotion of serotonin to the brain, that feel-good hormone. And then the drop. As that sugar leaves your body and as that sugar leaves your brain, you may be left with some of the unwanted consequences, which is basically a sugar crash. So we know from our own experiences with sugar, and we certainly know from looking at our children and their experiences with sugar, that sugar has potential detrimental effects. Some scientists have proposed that sweet foods actually produce an addiction-like effect. And I actually read a statistic or a quote somewhere. It said that sugar is as addictive, if not more addictive, even than something like cocaine. It actually works on the same receptor sites in an area of the brain that does lead to addictive behaviors and tendencies with that particular chemical. So in children, their brains are still developing, and so this effect on these receptor sites that deal with addiction actually can be really problematic. And so the first thing is that I think really for parents, you want to address the sugar culture in your family. I'm not saying never have sugar. Certainly there are places for that, and also assessing what kinds of sugar you want to allow in your family and in your child's diet. There's a big difference between say like a giant bowl of Skittles and a homemade healthy naturally sweetened baked good in the way that the body is going to process that sugar, maybe the additives that are in the refined candies, and the known health benefits of many of maybe the other ingredients in, say, like an almond butter brownie, for example. Again, there's a spectrum, but I think if you are considering that maybe your child's behavior, mood, or learning is being affected by sugar, I think it's really valuable to take a look at maybe how much sugar you as a family are consuming, maybe how much sugar your child is consuming, maybe if your child is a teenager and becoming more independent, how much sugar are they consuming when you're not around? It's very common for children to be, sort of peer persuaded, if you will, in groups to be, downing 32 ounces of soda or, having gigantic ice creams, eating candy bars. And then in general, I think we overlook sometimes a lot of just kind of the hidden sugars that are in many of our foods that even have maybe a perceived health benefit. Think about, for example, many healthy cereals, yogurts, and even just any refined flour products that break down in essence into into the basic glucose molecule, and that also is taking its toll as it adds kind of to the body's total burden of sugar. So I also have a blog on my website called The Real Horror of Halloween is Totally Sugar, tips on how to save your kids. And so if you're like, I think maybe I need to look into this sugar issue a little bit more, please check out that article on my website. I've been working on that article and sharing that subject as a presentation for families in like local community groups and in daycares and schools and learning environments to parents and teachers and other healthcare providers for many, many years. And this is actually a subject that I'm very passionate about. So go ahead and check that out and let me know what you think. I'd love to have you drop me a line in the contact us page of my website and let me know what your thoughts are just on sugar and kids in general. So the next thing that I would really like to address as far as ADHD-like symptoms and maybe another potential food or ingredient in foods that may be affecting the development of the healthy normal brain in children would be caffeine. And so, gosh, I mean, certainly if you have, a 3-year-old, you're probably not too worried about caffeine. But what I actually see a lot in my practice are parents who are noticing that their children, especially tweens and teens, are starting to be drawn to caffeinated beverages, caffeinated foods, and caffeinated supplements, even to help give their child the needed focus that they have for certain activities and tasks. So kids who might be having ADHD-like symptoms notice that that sometimes caffeine actually can be beneficial in that it stimulates the brain and may actually have some of the similar characteristics as an ADHD medication. But at the same time, these medications, as well as caffeine, can also have sort of a rebound effect and make ADHD-like symptoms worse. So similarly to my proposition for you to think about yourself with sugar, I would also encourage you to think about your relationship with caffeine and just think for a second, like, how do I feel when I've had too much caffeine? Am I really better able to focus, or do I feel jittery and wiry and kind of stressed out and like fight or flight mode? Me, I'm like a 1 cup a day girl, and if I go much more than that, it doesn't really help me. The benefits are lost after that. I can just kind of feel revved up, irritable, anxious, and then later much, much more tired. So I know that this is not just a problem for kids. It's a problem really with any person who's utilizing caffeine from coffee or sodas or chocolate or supplements or certain foods that may be including caffeine as an additive. So really what I think is important to know is that the buzz or the stimulus from caffeine isn't really sustainable. This is not a really great way for a child to be managing ADHD-like symptoms such as inattention. In the long run, too much caffeine makes a kid feel worse, and then they need to continue to use caffeine in order to kind of overcome those crashes that they're maybe experiencing after they use caffeine. So other things that kids do tend to feel that are different from adults is that caffeine, because they have smaller bodies, can actually make them feel more jittery, more anxious, and also affect their stomachs. More readily available on maybe just 1 cup of coffee than an adult. So I hate to say it, but I see lots of teenagers walking around town with big old Starbucks in their hands. I'm always just hoping that there's some herbal tea or maybe even a decaf in that cup. But lots of kids are turning to caffeinated beverages in their younger years, formative years. I think there's a lot of pressure in society on academic performance, stress management. They're maybe juggling lots of different activities. And for a kid who maybe is already struggling with some of the, kind of mood and brain focus, attention, memory, cognition, etc., caffeine really is unfortunately not at all a great part of their sustainable long-term health plan. The next thing and last thing that I want to address as far as maybe other foods that have a negative impact on our kids is the consumption of fast food and junk food. And honestly, I feel like you're maybe rolling your eyes thinking like, yeah, no kidding. Fast food and junk food isn't really good for anyone, and we know that already. And the problem is that for many is that we know that, and yet it's still a very prevalent component of food in our culture. And it's also fast food and junk food is almost synonymous with tweens and teens and young adults because it's inexpensive, it's convenient, and it's very socially acceptable to tap into a vending machine, go through the drive-through, pick up a bag of Cheetos, whatever at that age and stage of life. What I would like to say about this is that any of these types of junk foods, fast food, packaged foods, they contain a lot of artificial food additives, chemical colorings, and artificial ingredients. These processing agents, basically, all of the things that are needed in order to make these things kind of taste amazing and be brightly colored orange, like Doritos or whatever. And they have addictive qualities, very similar to sugar, because they're using ingredients that are developed by food scientists to make that food not only appealing but also addictive to the brain. And so what basically we need to know is that, occasional consumption of these foods, a healthy body can process and deal with those added ingredients. But for a child who is maybe also dealing with ADHD like symptoms and consuming junk food or fast food on a regular basis, their body is dealing with an overload of toxins and may not be able to process out those fillers, additives, flavorings, colorings, etc., in order to enable their brain to function as well as it should. Toxins do have to be processed and gotten rid of by the body. And so toxins that the body can't get rid of, they have to go somewhere. Children, typically, the way that this gets handled in their growth and development is that they either store toxins in fat cells, and this is maybe one of the reasons why we're seeing an increase in childhood obesity, is partly just due to the diet of lower nutrient, higher calorie foods, but also due to the sheer number of toxins that children are consuming, is that the body doesn't have the resources and capacity and energy available to get rid of all of those toxins that are in our food supply. The other thing is that toxins that the body can't get rid of on its own get stored in the brain. Your brain is made up of a large matter of fat. So this is another area in the body where toxins that can cross the blood-brain barrier and they make it into the brain tissue. If it can't be removed naturally through methylation pathways, detox pathways, normal cleansing pathways in the body, well, these persistent chemicals that are in our food supply are going to stay in the brain. So this is problematic. And what I like to call these persistent toxins, I like to call them excitotoxins. That's another name for excitatory neurotoxins. And again, these are the types of ingredients that are added to make food seem more flavorful, more exciting, kind of that umami flavoring. It's very addicting. These are the addictive additives and flavorings that are added to food so that our children, once they taste those spicy nacho Doritos for the first time, they want to have them again. They want more. Excitotoxins are non-essential ingredients, and they're basically made up from amino acid groups. They serve to stimulate the sensory system in the brain, and this can lead to not only storage of toxins in the brain, but also to inflammation in the brain. So it is quite concerning. What we've seen through a host of neurological studies is that diseases that are becoming more rampant in our lifetime, like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia, multiple sclerosis, lupus, and many other diseases that have a brain component, may have a trigger in excitatory neurotoxins or excitotoxins that originated from the consumption of a lot of processed foods and junk foods. So take this with a grain of salt, literally, but I do think it's really important, not just for you to read my article that's on my website about, ADHD-like symptoms and nutrition for growing brains, but please do your own research. Check out some food labels. Can you pronounce the words on those food labels? I think that there are so many crazy chemical-sounding, long, hard-to-pronounce words. They are not food ingredients, and they are readily available to our children, and they are creating changes and damage and inflammation to our children's brains. So I'm going to wrap it up. I know this is a lot of information, and thank you so much for staying and watching and listening to this information. I really just want to say that, what I focused on today is a lot of the information about foods that can contribute to ADHD-like symptoms in children, but more on my blog. I have the information for you about the right type of diet that can help promote healthy brain development. You can check out this blog post, and you can also, again, read my article about sugar. I also have other articles about how brain development and digestion are related, and also about the importance of fully absorbing nutrients from food in order to help a healthy growing brain be at its best. So thank you for watching. If you're interested about more nutrition topics for kids, I've got lots of other videos. One that I just posted not too long ago about vitamin D supplementation for kids. You might be wondering if this is something that you need to be giving your kiddos. So check that out. And remember to like and share these videos, pass them on to other families that you know, other moms and dads who are asking the same types of questions that you are in your homes about healthy nutrition for your family and for your children. And you can subscribe to my channel and set your notifications button to get all of these videos in the future. I'll be back with more tips and information soon. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care.